You checked their profile again. Not because you thought anything would change. You knew nothing would change. You checked it because the door is still technically open, no block, no formal goodbye, just a quiet withdrawal that left you standing in a hallway that leads nowhere, holding a conversation you never got to finish. They still follow you. They still watch your stories occasionally, like someone walking past a window they used to live behind. And somehow that's worse than being blocked. If they'd blocked you, you'd have a wall to push against. Instead, you got a door with no one behind it. And you've been knocking on that door in your head very softly for weeks. You've probably already done the math, the timestamps, the last opened, the read receipts. You've run the detective work in your own mind at 11 p.m. in a way that would genuinely impress the writers of a BBC crime drama, and you've arrived at the same conclusion 17 different times. They're not coming back. And then, because you are who you are, you started wondering what's wrong with you. That question, what's wrong with me, is the one we need to slow down for. Because the answer isn't what you think. Here's what's actually happening. In the late 1960s and through the 1970s, a developmental psychologist named Mary Ainsworth conducted a series of experiments that permanently changed how science understands human connection. The studies, now called the strange situation experiments, were elegantly simple. She brought mothers and their infants into a room, had the mother leave for a short period, then return, and watched carefully how each baby responded to both the separation and the reunion. Most babies did the intuitive thing. They got distressed when the caregiver left. They calmed and sought closeness when she returned. That's attachment doing exactly what it was designed to do. But a specific group of babies didn't follow that script at all. When the mother left, they barely reacted. When she came back, they seemed almost unbothered, continuing to play, not moving toward her, not reaching up, not showing any visible sign of distress. On camera, they looked like the composed ones, the independent ones. The ones who had it together in a way that made the crying babies seem, by comparison, a little dramatic. They were not fine. What the physiological data showed underneath all that composure was that those babies were just as stressed as the ones who were openly crying. Their cortisol levels, their heart rates, their biological distress markers, all of it told a completely different story than their faces did. What Ainsworth understood, and what decades of subsequent research has confirmed, is that those babies had learned something very early before language, before memory, before any ability to make conscious sense of experience, that expressing need did not bring comfort, it brought distance. It brought a caregiver who pulled back or shut down or simply wasn't equipped to meet what was being shown. So their developing nervous systems did the only rational thing available. They learned to stop showing the need at the surface level, not to stop having it. They could not stop having it. They just learned to route it inward, to bury it somewhere quiet and inaccessible, to keep the outside calm, while the inside continued running the emergency signal on a private frequency. That pattern has a name now. Researchers call it dismissive avoidant attachment, and the person who went quiet on you almost certainly didn't choose it. They were handed it before they were old enough to refuse it. The door isn't open because they're waiting. The door is open because closing it would require them to feel the full weight of what's standing on the other side. And feeling that weight is precisely what their nervous system has spent a lifetime engineering itself to avoid. That doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make the silence acceptable or the ambiguity fair, but it makes it something categorically different from a verdict on your worth. And that difference matters more than it probably feels like it does right now. Here's where it gets more specific, because this is the part your brain has been trying to solve without the right information. The part of the brain doing most of the work here is the prefrontal cortex, the region sitting just behind your forehead, responsible for long-term planning, emotional regulation, and connecting the present moment to past experience. In people with avoidant attachment patterns, neuroscientist Mario Mikulincer and his colleagues published research in the early 2000s showing something that should genuinely change how you interpret what happened. When someone with avoidant attachment begins to feel genuine closeness, when the relationship starts to feel real, when the stakes go up, when you stop being abstract and start being actual, their brain routes the emotional signal away from conscious processing before it can be fully felt. Not deliberately, not strategically. Automatically, the way your knee jerks when a doctor taps it. The feeling doesn't disappear, it gets redirected underground. And what surfaces instead is restlessness, irritability, a sudden and inexplicable need for space, or a quiet withdrawal that the avoidant person themselves often cannot fully explain because they don't have clean access to the thing that triggered it. You feel things loudly, in real time, in high definition with full surround sound. They feel things on a delay, through insulation, and what comes through most clearly is usually the discomfort of the feeling rather than the feeling itself. So here's what it actually looked like from inside their experience in the weeks before they went quiet. Things were going well, genuinely well, in a way that started to feel real and close and important. And that's precisely when their nervous system flagged the situation as dangerous. Not consciously. The same way your stomach drops a half second before you realize you've tripped. The pull toward you and the pull away happened at the same time, creating a tension that their entire emotional architecture was built to resolve in exactly one direction: retreat. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like gravity. Like the only available breath was the one they took by creating distance. And on your end, you got a door that's still technically open. No explanation, no conversation. Just the specific silence of someone who hasn't decided, because deciding would require them to feel the thing they've spent their whole life learning not to feel. If you've been crafting the perfect message, you're not wrong to want to reach them. You're wrong about which problem you're trying to solve. The advice you've probably already heard: give them space. Don't chase. Be patient. Make yourself less available isn't wrong in some abstract sense. But it assumes something that isn't true. It assumes that if you manage the situation more skillfully, the pattern will change. It won't, not because you're not skilled enough, because the pattern doesn't live in the situation. It lives in a nervous system that was shaped decades before you arrived. And the cruelest thing about that advice is that it's always handed to the person already in the most pain, as though the burden of maintaining a connection belongs entirely to the one who wants it more. It doesn't. It never did. Every careful message you sent, every strategic silence you held, every time you tried to shrink yourself small enough that they'd stop feeling crowded, you weren't failing. The entire framework was wrong, not you, the framework. So what do you actually do now? The first thing is to stop translating their behavior through your own emotional logic. This sounds simple and is actually fairly difficult. Your nervous system is anxious-leaning, which means closeness reads as safety and distance reads as a signal that something has broken. Their nervous system is avoidant-leaning, which means closeness reads as threat and distance reads as the first real breath they've taken all week. You're not speaking different dialects of the same language. You're speaking languages that evolved in opposite directions from the same root. In 2010, psychiatrist Amir Levine and researcher Rachel Heller laid out what they called the anxious-avoidant trap. The specific dynamic where each person's nervous system response is the exact thing that activates the other person's wound. When you reach out to reassure the connection, they experience it as pressure, which triggers withdrawal. When they withdraw to regulate themselves, you experience it as rejection, which triggers more reaching out. Both responses are internally logical, both are nervous system appropriate, and together they create a loop that escalates without anyone intending it to. Understanding this doesn't fix the situation, but it stops you from doing something specific, designing more and more personalized attempts to reach someone who isn't currently reachable. You've been spending real cognitive and emotional energy, the kind that's genuinely limited and genuinely costs you on a problem that you did not create and cannot engineer your way out of. That energy belongs to you. It was always yours. The second thing is practical in a way that might feel slightly absurd. When the loop starts the profile checking, the message drafting, the 1 a.m. timeline reconstruction, your body is running a low-grade threat response. Your brain has classified the ambiguity as danger, and it's trying to resolve the danger by thinking harder, analyzing more carefully, finding the angle it missed. That's not weakness. That's anxious attachment executing its primary function. But thinking harder does not discharge physiological stress, it generates more of it. What actually shifts the nervous system is physical input, temperature change, movement, sound. Researchers at Stanford, including neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, have documented what they call the physiological sigh, a double inhale through the nose followed by a long, extended exhale, as one of the fastest voluntary methods of down-regulating the stress response. You can do it right now, in the middle of reading this. You don't have to feel better immediately. You just have to give your nervous system a different signal than the one it's been running on for the past 2 hours. Cold water on your wrists. walking from one room to another, a sound you make out loud, even just a breath. These aren't metaphors for healing. They're interrupts for a loop your nervous system doesn't know how to exit on its own. The third thing is the one that takes the most honesty. You need to let the door mean what it means. Not dramatically, not as a declaration, just quietly, internally, enough to stop treating ambiguity as a form of hope. When someone disappears without formally closing anything, your attachment system reads the open door as a reason to wait, because it is wired to pursue connection and resolve uncertainty by maintaining access. The door looks like possibility. But an unlocked door with no one behind it is not a promise. It's just a door someone didn't bother to close on their way out. And waiting at that door, checking it, listening at it, knocking softly every few days is a very gradual, very quiet way of placing your life on hold for a situation that has already made its shape clear. A warning before you try that third thing. The first few times you attempt to set something down instead of chasing it, it will feel wrong in a way that's hard to distinguish from making a mistake. Not wrong, like doing something against your values, wrong, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. Your nervous system has a very specific and well-practiced script for this situation, and that script says reach out, try again, find a different angle, do not stop. Doing something different will feel like a small betrayal of something. It isn't. It's what happens when a nervous system encounters a response that doesn't match its established pattern. The discomfort is the process, not the outcome. Learning to walk after years of crawling doesn't feel like progress the first few times. It mostly just feels like falling. One distinction that matters, because not everything in this video applies to every situation. This entire framework is built around a pattern, a habitual, automatic, nervous system level withdrawal that predates you and isn't really about you. But not every quiet withdrawal is a pattern. Sometimes silence is accurate information. Sometimes someone going distant is simply telling you something true in the only way they've decided to say it. The way to tell the difference is not complicated, but it requires honesty. If this person has demonstrated, across time, that they can communicate when something genuinely matters to them, that they've navigated difficult conversations before, that they've expressed needs and conflicts in other areas and they're choosing not to do that now, with you, that silence is data. It's telling you something about the specific choice they're making, not about a pattern they're trapped inside. If, on the other hand, this is someone who has repeatedly disappeared when things got close, repeatedly returned without explanation, and consistently been unable to account for where they went, that's the pattern. One of those situations is about you. The other was never really about you from the beginning. When the loop activates, and it will, probably tonight, possibly in an hour, there are a few things worth saying to yourself. Not affirmations, not reframes, just sentences that happen to be accurate. You're not waiting at this door because you're weak. You're waiting because your attachment system is executing exactly the function it was built for. That's not a character flaw. That's a very old, very loyal piece of software running on hardware that has since been upgraded. They didn't design this pattern deliberately. You didn't choose your response to it. Neither of those facts makes the current situation something you have to stay inside. Wanting clarity from someone who genuinely cannot offer it is not evidence that you need too much. It's evidence that you need the basic minimum that any connection requires to function. Those are different things. And this, the version of you that kept the door open, that kept checking, kept trying, kept finding reasons to believe the silence meant something other than what it meant, was doing it out of loyalty to something that felt real. That loyalty is not a defect. It is a quality that belongs somewhere it will actually be received. This pattern, the waiting, the analysis, the trying to love someone back into the room through sheer precision of effort, was built because at some point it was the best available option. Your nervous system designed it when you had fewer tools and less information. That is no longer the situation you are in. You are safe enough now to start letting it soften. Not all at once. Just enough to walk away from a door that isn't going to open and back toward the parts of your life that are still fully, completely yours. Next time, we go to the other side of this. If anything in this video felt uncomfortably familiar, not because you were the one left waiting, but because you recognized yourself in the one who disappeared, that's the next conversation. Why intimacy starts to feel like a closing room. What the avoidant person actually feels in the silence they created, and why the person who looks the least hurt is almost always the one carrying the most.